In the small southern town of Willow Creek, where history lingered like a shadow over every street corner, Officer Daniel Hargrove was a name everyone knew. Whether whispered in fear or muttered in anger, his reputation preceded him. For 20 years, he had been a fixture of the local police force patrolling neighborhoods with an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. To some, he was a protector of law and order. To others, he was a symbol of everything wrong with the system. But one thing was certain. Daniel Hargrove believed himself untouchable. Hargrove's confidence wasn't without reason. Over the years, he had faced countless accusations, ranging from unfair treatment during traffic stops to outright brutality. Yet each time, he emerged unscathed. His record remained spotless, not because he was innocent, but because he was careful. He knew how to navigate the legal system, exploiting loopholes and leaning on technicalities to avoid accountability. In courtrooms, he carried himself with an almost theatrical bravado, intimidating witnesses and lawyers alike. It was this combination of preparation and audacity that made him feel invincible. Willow Creek itself was a town steeped in its own complicated past. Segregation might have officially ended decades ago, but its scars were still visible. Old prejudices lingered beneath polite smiles and casual conversations. The divide between communities ran deep, and Hargrove thrived in this environment. To many white residents, he was a hero, a tough cop keeping the peace. To black residents, however, he represented something far darker, a reminder of the power imbalance that persisted despite progress. It was in this charged atmosphere that Hargrove found himself once again at the center of controversy. This time, the incident involved Marcus Jennings, a man who couldn't have been more different from Hargrove. Jennings was a pastor at one of the largest churches in Willow Creek, known for his calm demeanor and commitment to community service. Unlike Hargrove, whose presence commanded attention through intimidation, Jennings inspired respect through kindness and wisdom. He was well-liked not just within his congregation but across the town, regardless of race. The trouble began late, one evening when Jennings was driving home after a long day at church. A routine traffic stop quickly spiraled out of control. According to Hargrove's report, Jennings had failed to signal a turn properly, which warranted pulling him over. But what happened next became the subject of heated debate. Witnesses claimed they saw Hargrove approach Jennings's car aggressively, barking orders before even asking for identification. When Jennings questioned why he was being treated so harshly, Hargrove allegedly grew irate, slamming him against the hood of the car and handcuffing him in full view of passing pedestrians. Word spread fast. By morning, the story was all over. Social media accompanied by grainy cell phone footage captured by bystanders. The video showed Jennings dressed in his clergy attire, wincing as Hargrove twisted his arms behind his back. For many, it was yet another example of excessive force disproportionately targeting black individuals. Others defended Hargrove, insisting he was simply doing his job. Either way, the incident ignited a firestorm of discussion about racial profiling and police conduct in Willow Creek. What made this case unique, however, was Jennings's response. Rather than retreat into silence or accept Hargrove's version of events, he decided to fight back. With the support of his congregation and local activists, Jennings hired a lawyer and announced his intention to sue Hargrove for wrongful arrest and excessive force. This decision sent shockwaves through the community and straight into Hargrove's ego. For Hargrove, the idea that someone like Jennings, a black man no less, would dare challenge him in court was laughable. He dismissed the lawsuit as a futile attempt to tarnish his reputation. "Let them try," he sneered to his colleagues at the precinct. "They'll see I've got nothing to hide." Privately, though, he felt a flicker of unease. Jennings wasn't like the other people he'd faced in court. There was something about the pastor's quiet determination that unsettled him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. As preparations for the trial began, Hargrove doubled down on his usual tactics. He reviewed body cam footage obsessively, ensuring there were no glaring errors. He rehearsed his testimony, imagining every possible question the opposing counsel might throw at him. He even reached out to old contacts in the legal world seeking advice on how to handle such cases. Everything seemed under control, or so he thought. Meanwhile, Jennings was quietly gathering strength. Far from being intimidated by Hargrove's swagger, he saw it as a weakness. "A man who relies on fear has already lost," he told his wife one evening as they discussed the upcoming battle. Jennings understood that this wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message to others who felt powerless in the face of injustice. If he could stand up to someone like Hargrove, perhaps others would find the courage to do the same. In the weeks leading up to the trial, tensions in Willow Creek reached a boiling point. Supporters of both men clashed online and in person, turning the town into a battleground of opinions. Protest signs appeared outside the courthouse bearing slogans like "Justice for Marcus" and "Back the Badge." Local news outlets covered the story extensively, drawing national attention to the case. For better or worse, the eyes of the country were now fixed on Willow Creek and on the two men at the heart of the storm. Unaware of the larger implications, Hargrove continued to operate under the assumption that he held all the cards. He strutted into pretrial hearings with the same cockiness that had served him well in the past. During breaks, he joked with fellow officers about how easy it would be to crush Jennings's case. "He's just a preacher," Hargrove scoffed. "What does he know about the real world?" But what Hargrove didn't realize was that Jennings wasn't alone. Standing beside him was Eleanor Hayes, a sharp-witted civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking down corrupt officials. She had spent months poring over evidence, interviewing witnesses, and piecing together a narrative that painted Hargrove not as a misunderstood officer, but as a product of systemic racism. Every detail mattered, every inconsistency was noted, and every opportunity to expose the truth was seized. By the time the trial officially began, the stage was set for a showdown unlike anything Willow Creek had ever seen. On one side stood Hargrove, brimming with misplaced confidence. On the other stood Jennings, resolute and unwavering. Between them lay not just a courtroom but a reckoning, one that would test the limits of justice, morality, and humanity itself. As the trial date approached, Officer Daniel Hargrove remained as overconfident as ever. He had spent years perfecting his courtroom persona, calm, collected, and unshakable. To him, this case was no different from any other. It was just another opportunity to demonstrate his authority and prove that he was above reproach. But what Hargrove failed to recognize was that this time, the stakes were higher than he imagined. The man sitting across from him wasn't a frightened suspect or an easily intimidated victim. Marcus Jennings was a pastor, a community leader, and someone who carried the hopes of countless people on his shoulders. The courtroom itself became a microcosm of Willow Creek's divided soul. Every day, it filled with spectators eager to witness the unfolding drama. On one side sat Jennings' supporters, members of his congregation, local activists, and families who had long endured the weight of systemic injustice. They wore their Sunday best, holding hands and whispering prayers under their breath. On the other side were Hargrove's defenders, mostly fellow officers, friends, and residents who believed in his version of law and order. The tension between the two groups was palpable, a silent storm brewing beneath the surface. Eleanor Hayes, Jennings' attorney, wasted no time in laying the groundwork for her case. She was a seasoned lawyer, known for her sharp intellect and relentless pursuit of justice. From the moment she stepped into the courtroom, it was clear that she meant business. Her opening statement painted a vivid picture of Hargrove's actions that night, not just as an isolated incident but as part of a larger pattern of misconduct. She spoke passionately about the impact of unchecked power, citing examples of similar cases where officers like Hargrove had exploited their positions to intimidate and harm marginalized communities. Hargrove listened to Hayes's words with growing irritation. He couldn't believe how bold she was, accusing him of things he hadn't even done. In his mind, he was the victim here, a hard-working officer being unfairly targeted because of his race and profession. "They're twisting the truth," he muttered to himself during breaks, clenching his fists in frustration. Yet despite his outward bravado, there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. For the first time, he began to wonder if he had underestimated his opponent. Hayes didn't rely solely on rhetoric. She came armed with evidence. Body cam footage from the night of the arrest showed Hargrove's aggressive behavior in stark detail. The video captured every word, every gesture, and every movement, leaving little room for interpretation. Witnesses testified about seeing Jennings handcuffed and pushed against his car without provocation. One woman, a mother of 3 who happened to be walking by that evening, described how Hargrove ignored Jennings' repeated questions and escalated the situation unnecessarily. "It was terrifying," she said, her voice trembling as she recounted the scene. "I thought something terrible was going to happen." Each piece of evidence chipped away at Hargrove's carefully constructed facade. Still, he refused to acknowledge the mounting pressure. Instead, he doubled down on his defense, insisting that he had acted appropriately given the circumstances. His own attorney worked tirelessly to discredit the witnesses, questioning their credibility and motives. At one point, Hargrove even smirked when a particularly nervous witness stumbled over their testimony. "See?" he whispered to his lawyer. "They can't handle the truth." But while Hargrove focused on undermining the prosecution's case, he missed the bigger picture. Hayes wasn't just building a legal argument. She was crafting a narrative that resonated far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Outside, social media buzzed with discussions about police accountability and racial inequality. Local news outlets ran stories highlighting Jennings's courage and the broader implications of the trial. Protesters gathered daily outside the courthouse holding signs that read, "Justice over fear and enough is enough." Slowly but surely, the tide was turning against Hargrove. Jennings, meanwhile, remained a pillar of strength throughout the proceedings. He sat quietly beside Hayes, listening intently to every word spoken. When it was his turn to take the stand, he did so with grace and poise. Dressed in a simple suit, he recounted the events of that fateful night with clarity and conviction. He spoke not just as a victim, but as a representative of all those who had suffered silently under the weight of oppression. "I'm not here for revenge," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I'm here because I believe in fairness, I believe in justice, and I believe that no one, not even someone wearing a badge, is above the law." His words struck a chord with everyone in the room. Even the judge seemed moved, nodding slightly as Jennings concluded his testimony. For Hargrove, however, the moment was infuriating. He couldn't understand why people were siding with Jennings instead of him. After all, he was the one enforcing the rules, keeping the streets safe, or so he told himself. What he failed to grasp was that true safety comes not from fear, but from trust, and trust was something he had squandered long ago. By the end of the second week, cracks were beginning to show in Hargrove's armor. His once flawless confidence wavered as Hayes dismantled his defenses one by one. During cross-examinations, she exposed inconsistencies in his story, forcing him to backtrack and contradict himself. She questioned his decision-making, pointing out moments where de-escalation could have prevented the entire ordeal. Most damning of all, she presented documents revealing a history of complaints filed against him, all dismissed or ignored until now. For Jennings and his supporters, these revelations were vindicating. They felt a renewed sense of hope, knowing that the truth was finally coming to light. For Hargrove, however, they were crushing. Each new piece of evidence felt like a blow to his pride, chipping away at the illusion of invincibility he had built over decades. By the time the trial entered its third phase, it was clear that the battle was far from over, but the momentum had shifted decisively in Jennings's favor. In the quiet moments between hearings, Hargrove found himself reflecting on how quickly everything had unraveled. He had always prided himself on his ability to stay in control, to dominate any situation. Yet here he was, standing on shaky ground, unsure of what would come next. For the first time in his career, he felt vulnerable, and it terrified him. Little did he know the worst was yet to come. As the trial entered its third week, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew increasingly tense. The air seemed heavier, charged with anticipation and emotion. Officer Daniel Hargrove, who had once strutted into the room with an air of invincibility, now carried himself differently. His shoulders weren't as squared, his jaw wasn't as clenched, and there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. For the first time, he began to realize that this case might not go the way he had always expected it would. Eleanor Hayes, Jennings's attorney, was relentless. She had spent weeks meticulously building her case, layering evidence upon evidence, until the picture she painted was impossible to ignore. On the stand, she called witness after witness, ordinary citizens whose lives had been touched by Hargrove's actions. Some recounted traffic stops where they felt humiliated or intimidated. Others described encounters that left them shaken and distrustful of law enforcement. Each story added another brick to the wall Hayes was constructing around Hargrove. But it wasn't just the witnesses who were chipping away at Hargrove's defenses. The body cam footage, which had already been shown multiple times, became a focal point during cross-examinations. Hayes played key moments repeatedly, slowing them down and zooming in on specific details. "Notice how Officer Hargrove approaches Pastor Jennings' vehicle," she said one afternoon, pointing to the screen. "Does this look like a routine stop? Does it seem proportionate to the alleged offense?" Her questions hung in the air, unanswered but deeply unsettling. Hargrove's frustration reached a boiling point when it came time for him to take the stand. Up until now, he had watched from the sidelines, confident that his version of events would prevail. But sitting under oath, facing Hayes's piercing gaze, he found himself struggling to maintain composure. She started with simple questions. Basic facts about the night of the arrest, but quickly escalated to more probing inquiries. "Officer Hargrove," Hayes began, leaning slightly forward, "you claim that Pastor Jennings resisted your instructions. Can you explain exactly what he did to resist?" "He was argumentative," Hargrove replied, his voice firm but tinged with irritation. "He questioned my authority, which isn't acceptable during a lawful stop." "So questioning your authority constitutes resistance?" Hayes pressed, raising an eyebrow. "Would you say that asking, 'Why am I being pulled over?' is resisting arrest?" The courtroom fell silent. Everyone leaned forward, waiting for Hargrove's response. He hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "It depends on the tone and context," he finally muttered, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Hayes seized the moment. So it's not the question itself, but how it's asked that determines whether someone is resisting. Isn't that subjective, Officer Hargrove? And doesn't that give you immense power to decide who is compliant and who isn't? Hargrove bristled. "I follow protocol, I enforce the law. If people don't like it, that's their problem." His dismissive tone drew murmurs from the gallery. Hayes let the comment linger before moving on to her next line of questioning. She shifted gears suddenly, steering the conversation toward Jennings' character. "You've referred to Pastor Jennings as just another troublemaker," she said, quoting Hargrove's earlier remarks outside the courtroom. "Do you stand by that statement?" "Yes," Hargrove snapped, his patience wearing thin. "He's making a big deal out of nothing. This whole trial is unnecessary." "And what makes you say that?" Hayes asked calmly, though her eyes sparkled with intent. "Is it because you believe Pastor Jennings is exaggerating his experience? Or is it because you think someone like him, a black man, shouldn't challenge someone like you?" The room erupted into gasps. Even the judge raised a hand to silence the crowd. Hargrove froze, realizing too late that he had walked straight into a trap. His face flushed red as he stammered, "That's not what I meant. I didn't mean it like that." Hayes didn't let up. "Then clarify, Officer Hargrove. What did you mean? Because to many people in this courtroom, and beyond, it sounds like you're implying that Pastor Jennings's race disqualifies him from seeking justice." "I'm not racist," Hargrove blurted out, his voice rising defensively. "I treat everyone the same." The damage was done. Hayes allowed the words to sink in, letting the jury and spectators absorb the weight of his poorly chosen defense. Then with quiet precision, she said, "If that's true, Officer Hargrove, then why does nearly every complaint filed against you involve a person of color? Why do your actions consistently target marginalized communities? Is that treating everyone the same, or is it something else entirely?" Hargrove slumped back in his chair, visibly rattled. For the first time, his confidence cracked wide open. He glanced at his lawyer, hoping for guidance, but even his counsel looked uneasy. The slip-up had been catastrophic, not just legally but symbolically. By lashing out and doubling down on his biases, Hargrove had inadvertently validated everything Jennings's team had been arguing all along. Outside the courtroom, the fallout was immediate. News outlets picked up on the exchange, broadcasting clips of Hargrove's testimony across the nation. Social media exploded with reactions as hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" trended nationwide. Protesters gathered in larger numbers than ever, before holding signs that read "Accountability starts now and no more excuses." Local leaders, including city council members and civil rights organizations, issued statements condemning Hargrove's behavior and calling for systemic change within law enforcement. Back inside the courtroom, Marcus Jennings sat quietly, watching the unraveling with a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. He hadn't wanted this fight. It had been thrust upon him, but now that it was here, he knew it was bigger than just him. It was about every person who had ever been told they were powerless, every family who had lost a loved one to unchecked authority, every child taught to fear those sworn to protect them. Jennings understood that while Hargrove's downfall might bring some measure whole, the real victory lay in sparking a conversation that could lead to lasting reform. As the day drew to a close, the judge adjourned the session, reminding everyone to remain respectful and composed. But respect was the last thing on anyone's mind. Outside, reporters swarmed Jennings and Hayes, eager for quotes and insights. Jennings spoke briefly, thanking his supporters and reiterating his commitment to justice. Hayes, meanwhile, stood. Beside him, her expression unreadable but her resolve unwavering. For Hargrove, the evening brought little relief. Back at home, he poured himself a drink and stared blankly at the television where pundits debated his fate. He tried to convince himself that it was all a misunderstanding, that Hayes had manipulated the narrative to make him look bad. Yet deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a grave mistake, one that might cost him everything. The trial was far from over, but the turning tide was undeniable. Hargrove's arrogance had blinded him to the humanity of those he policed, and now that blindness threatened to consume him. As Jennings and Hayes prepared for the final stretch, they knew the hardest battles still lay ahead. But for the first time, hope felt tangible, a fragile yet powerful force driving them forward. As the trial entered its fourth week, the momentum had decisively shifted. What began as a local dispute over a traffic stop had transformed into a national reckoning about systemic racism and police accountability. The courtroom was packed every day, not just with spectators, but with reporters, activists, and even curious citizens from neighboring towns. Each session felt like a chapter in a much larger story, one that resonated far beyond Willow Creek. Eleanor Hayes continued to dismantle Officer Daniel Hargrove's defense with surgical precision. She introduced damning evidence piece by piece, painting a picture of a man who had repeatedly abused his authority without consequence. Documents revealed a pattern, numerous complaints against Hargrove dating back years, all dismissed or ignored. Witnesses testified about similar experiences: unnecessary escalation, verbal abuse, and outright intimidation during routine interactions. One elderly woman recounted being pulled over for a broken taillight, only to be berated by Hargrove for driving too slowly. Another young man described how Hargrove handcuffed him during a minor altercation at a park, leaving bruises that took weeks to heal. Each testimony added weight to Jennings' case, but it wasn't just the quantity of evidence that mattered. It was the humanity behind it. These weren't statistics or faceless victims. They were real people whose lives had been disrupted by Hargrove's actions. Their stories struck a chord with the jury, many of whom exchanged glances as if silently, acknowledging the gravity of what they were hearing. For Hargrove, the unraveling was both public and deeply personal. His once impenetrable confidence had eroded into something fragile and brittle. During breaks, he paced nervously outside the courtroom, chain-smoking cigarettes despite having quit years ago. His colleagues avoided eye contact, sensing that associating with him might tarnish their own reputations. Even his lawyer seemed less enthusiastic, his arguments growing weaker as Hayes tightened her grip on the narrative. But perhaps the most devastating blow came when Hayes called Reverend Marcus Jennings to the stand for a second time. This wasn't part of the original plan, but Jennings himself had requested it. He wanted to speak directly to the jury, not as a victim seeking revenge, but as a leader advocating for change. When he rose from his seat and walked to the witness box, the room fell silent. Everyone leaned forward, hanging on his every word. Jennings spoke softly but with profound clarity. "I'm not here because I hate Officer Hargrove," he began, his voice steady and calm. "I'm here because I love my community. I've spent my life trying to build bridges, to bring people together, and to remind them that we are stronger when we stand united. But standing united means holding everyone accountable, even those in positions of power." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "That night, Officer Hargrove didn't just arrest me. He attacked my dignity. He made me feel small, insignificant, and powerless. And I know I'm not alone. There are countless others who have felt the same way. People who have been silenced, dismissed, or told to let it go. But letting it go doesn't fix anything. It allows the cycle to continue." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Jennings went on to describe the impact of Hargrove's actions, not just on himself, but on his family, his congregation, and the broader community. He talked about the fear that gripped parents when their children left the house, knowing they could be targeted simply for the color of their skin. He shared stories of young men in his church who dreamed of becoming doctors, teachers, and engineers, but who also knew they might never get the chance if one wrong move cost them their freedom, or worse, their lives. "I'm not asking for sympathy," Jennings concluded. "I'm asking for justice, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of who they are. We deserve better. Our town deserves better. And our country deserves better." When Jennings finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the judge, known for his stoic demeanor, removed his glasses and wiped his eyes discreetly. The jury sat motionless, visibly moved by Jennings's words. Hargrove, meanwhile, stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. For the first time, he looked truly defeated. Outside the courtroom, the reaction was electric. News outlets broadcast Jennings's testimony nationwide, amplifying his message of hope and resilience. Social media lit up with support, as hashtags like "Marcus Stand with Marcus" and "Justice for All" trended across platforms. Local leaders organized rallies and town hall meetings to discuss policing reform, inspired by Jennings' courage. Even some of Hargrove's former supporters began to waver, questioning whether their loyalty to law enforcement outweighed their commitment to fairness and equality. Back inside the courtroom, Hayes capitalized on the emotional tide. She presented closing arguments that tied everything together: the evidence, the testimonies, and Jennings' powerful words. "This isn't just about one man," she told the jury. "It's about what kind of society we want to live in. Do we want a world where power is wielded without accountability? Or do we want a world where justice prevails no matter how uncomfortable it may be?" Hargrove's lawyer tried to counter, urging the jury to focus on technicalities rather than emotions. But his arguments felt hollow compared to the vivid, human-centered case Hayes had built. By the time both sides rested, it was clear which direction the trial was heading. As the judge instructed the jury to begin deliberations, tension filled the air. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, awaiting the verdict. Protesters held vigils, praying for justice while preparing for whatever outcome lay ahead. Inside, Jennings clasped his wife's hand tightly, drawing strength from her presence. Hayes patted his shoulder reassuringly, though she refused to make any predictions. Hargrove, meanwhile, sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the wall. The turning tide had brought the trial to this pivotal moment. For Jennings, it was a chance to reclaim his dignity and inspire others to stand up against injustice. For Hargrove, it was a reckoning long overdue, a reminder that no one, regardless of their badge or title, is above the law. And for Willow Creek, it was an opportunity to confront its painful past and take meaningful steps toward healing. Though the final verdict was still unknown, one thing was certain. The battle wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about sending a a message that would echo far beyond the walls of the courtroom and shape the future of an entire community. The final day of the trial arrived, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Every seat was filled, every corner occupied by those eager to witness history unfold. Reporters jostled for position near the front, their cameras poised to capture the moment that would define not just this case, but perhaps the future of Willow Creek itself. Outside, crowds gathered under gray skies, holding signs and chanting slogans like "Justice over power" and "Change starts now." The air buzzed with anticipation, hope mingling uneasily with anxiety. Inside, the jury filed back into the room after hours of deliberation. Their faces were unreadable, neither celebratory nor somber, as they handed their verdict slip to the bailiff. The judge took it solemnly, scanned its contents, and nodded before addressing the court. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady and authoritative, "has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," replied the foreperson, standing tall as all eyes turned toward her. She cleared her throat and read aloud. "In the matter of Marcus Jennings versus Daniel Hargrove, we find the defendant, Officer Daniel Hargrove, guilty on all counts." A collective gasp rippled through the room. For a brief moment, there was silence, a stunned pause as the weight of the words settled over everyone. Then came the eruption. Cheers broke out among Jennings' supporters, tears streaming down faces as hugs were exchanged. Some fell to their knees in prayer, overcome with emotion. On the other side of the room, Hargrove's allies sat in stunned disbelief, their expressions ranging from anger to despair. Hargrove himself slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. His once unshakable confidence had crumbled entirely. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly to restore order. When the room finally quieted, he proceeded to deliver the sentence. "Officer Daniel Hargrove," he began, his tone firm but measured. "You have been found guilty of excessive force, wrongful arrest, and violating the civil rights of Pastor Marcus Jennings. In light of the evidence presented and the egregious nature of your actions, I hereby sentence you to 5 years in federal prison. Upon your release, you will be required to undergo mandatory sensitivity training and community service. Furthermore, your badge is hereby revoked permanently. You are no longer fit to serve as an officer of the law." The courtroom erupted again, this time louder than before. Supporters of justice cheered while Hargrove's colleagues whispered nervously among themselves. As deputies escorted him from the room, handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights, Hargrove looked up one last time at Jennings. Their eyes met briefly, but where Jennings stood tall and composed, Hargrove could only stare back, defeated and broken. After the verdict, the town of Willow Creek seemed to exhale a breath it had been holding for decades. The streets buzzed with conversation, not just about the trial, but about what it meant for the future. Social media lit up with reactions, many celebrating the outcome as a long-overdue victory against systemic injustice. Local leaders seized the momentum, organizing forums and workshops aimed at fostering dialogue between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Schools incorporated discussions about racial equity into their curriculums, ensuring the lessons of this case wouldn't fade with time. For Marcus Jennings, the victory was bittersweet. He hadn't sought fame or recognition. He simply wanted accountability and healing. As he stepped out of the courthouse surrounded by friends, family, and supporters, he addressed the crowd gathered outside. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "It's the beginning. Today we celebrate justice, but tomorrow we must continue working toward reconciliation. We owe it to ourselves, to our children, and to this town to build something better." His words resonated deeply, inspiring many to take action. Activists formed coalitions to push for policy changes within the police department, including stricter oversight and transparency measures. Community members volunteered to mentor youth, teaching them how to navigate interactions with law enforcement safely and confidently. Slowly but surely, Willow Creek began to change. Not overnight, but incrementally, one conversation and one decision at a time. Meanwhile, Eleanor Hayes became a household name, hailed as a champion of civil rights. Her work on the case earned her national acclaim, and she used her platform to advocate for similar reforms across the country. Speaking at conferences and interviews, she emphasized the importance of perseverance and unity. "Justice isn't given freely," she often said. "It's fought for collectively, and when we stand together, even the most entrenched systems can be challenged." As for Daniel Hargrove, his fall from grace was complete. Behind bars, he reflected on the choices that had led him here. At first, he blamed everyone else: the media, the activists, even Jennings himself. But as months passed and solitude forced introspection, he began to see glimpses of truth. He thought about the people he had hurt, the trust he had broken, and the legacy he had left behind. Though it came too late to undo the damage, he resolved to use his remaining years wisely, to learn humility, empathy, and respect for others. Years later, Willow Creek bore little resemblance to the divided town it once was. New policies ensured greater accountability within the police force, and community policing initiatives helped bridge gaps between officers and residents. Statues and plaques commemorated Jennings' courage, serving as reminders of the power of standing up for what is right. Children grew up learning about the trial not as a tale of conflict, but as a story of resilience and transformation. And yet, amidst the progress, there remained a sobering awareness that true equality requires constant vigilance. The scars of the past couldn't be erased overnight, but they could be acknowledged and addressed. Through determination and unity, the people of Willow Creek proved that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal, if only they dared to try. In the end, the trial wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing or vindicating innocence. It was about hope, a belief that no matter how entrenched the barriers, change is possible. And as long as voices like Marcus Jennings continued to rise above the noise, the promise of a fairer, kinder world remained within reach.